Okay, I guess we'll just see how this works. So, how many of you have had economics before? Oh, a couple of you. Okay, great. So you can tell me what economics is. Anyone? No? Yeah.
Is it the study of using limited resources wisely or how to use limited resources?
I like that you said that's excellent. Right? So we can do the really boring definition, and it's going to be mostly what you're saying. Not that I'm judging you for saying I've given you a boring definition. You know, it is the study of the optimal allocation of scarce resources. Now you said something slightly different. You said limited. What is limited?
Because we went to see class last semester and my classmate said that like no resource has like learning how to use these resources wisely.
Yeah. So what's your name? Edward. You're missing a seat technically, but if you want, you can share this seat. And then I don't know. We'll sort that out too. You're like, all right. So I'm hesitant to use the word limited because limited has a kind of connotation of like if there are things that are limited that we wouldn't necessarily call scarce. Does that make sense? So like there's a limited amount of air on the planet. Right? You can count it up, it's a certain volume at the end, right? But we wouldn't consider air to be scarce. Why would we not consider air to be scarce?
Because everyone has an option.
There isn't what?
Like there isn't like a demand for it.
I like that you added in the market because there's a demand for it, right?
Yeah,
there is demand for it.
No one is like needing to buy it or
Why don't? Well, we do really need it. But I like that you say because you're thinking in terms of a market. So if people are going to a market, that means there's questions of who gets it and who doesn't get it, right? Can we use as much air as we want? Yeah. Does anyone say, stop breathing so much, you're taking my air? No. We're not like maybe if we were trapped on some sort of like submarine or something, or on a space station. But generally speaking, we just have as much as we want. Even though it is limited, it is not scarce. Scarcity in economics has a definition. The exact definition will vary, the exact wording will vary from person to person, but it simply means that our wants exceed our ability to fulfill. Those wants. Air is not a scarce resource. Therefore, economics doesn't have anything to say about it. Because everyone just gets as much as they want. There's no question of allocation. If something is not scarce, there's no point in trying to figure out everyone just takes as much. Can you give me an example of something that is scarce? Yeah, go ahead.
Gas.
Gas, yeah, why?
Because it's not unlimited.
Well, again, we don't want to focus on the unlimited part. Well,
It's finite.
it's finite. Again, we don't want to focus on that.
It can't be. It requires additional parties to obtain. It requires specialized equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of those things are things that could be doing something else, right? Any person who is, drilling oil out of the ground or refining it could be doing something else with the time that they would like to do. And so that labor is scarce. People are doing one thing, they could be doing something else. and we only have so much of this oil here, and we have multiple uses for it. You could turn oil into gasoline. You can turn oil, essentially it's split apart, but even within that context of the gasoline, you can use that gas to go to the store. You can use that gas to take a long drive somewhere. You can use the gas for lots of different stuff. Gas can be used to power plants and use lots of different things for that. There are alternative uses. We can't do all of them. We have to choose. But I really want to get away from this idea that it's about limited. Because I can think of something that's very limited, that's very rare, that's still not scarce. Let me show you what it is. It's not a person, it's a picture. I'll sign it. Frame it. David Youngberg original. It is the only one that exists in the entire universe. It is limited. I can say, I promise I'm not going to make any more. The one. Is it scarce? No, why you say you shook your head? No, why?
Because it said that the wants are greater than the goods.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
So it's really important in this class that you are honest with me and brutally honest with me. Because a lot of my examples don't work if you sugarcoat it. Is this scarce? No. Why not? Nobody wants it, right? I would go so far as it sucks. It's not good. In other words, and sometimes I get one joker who's like, I really think it's great. It's like, well, even then, it's not scarce. Because that person just gets the painting, we're done. There's no question of allocation. But quite frankly, even one is too many. It's not a matter of being limited. It's always going to be a function of both how much there is and how much people actually want. It's only then, when we have not enough of something, that's what we define as not enough, that we have to start making choices. So a shorter definition is economics is a study of choice. Sometimes called the study of scarcity. Sometimes if we want to say it, study of. I would even go so far as to say it's a study of how to get the most out of lofty. A lofty claim. Before we get into exactly that lofty claim, we should do a little aside. Because I feel a little strange if we don't do this. Broadly speaking, we divvy up economics into two areas. Macro and micro. Want to take a guess as the distinction between the two? Yeah?
Scale.
Scale. Tell me more.
Macro is probably the economics of a whole economy, be it a country or
So that's macro or that's micro?
macro. Yeah, or country or state. I guess depending on your definition of how big is, and then micro would probably be closer to like, a small business. Their individual the economics of their business, how they run their sales.
I would go so far as to say that micro would include not just small businesses, but all single businesses. In fact, even we could go as small as to study an entire industry. It's just the moment that we start going into multiple industries and their interaction, that's when we kind of get into macro. That's kind of, there's a gray area. That's kind of how I divide it up. Yeah, and this is, of course, macro. So we will be studying the whole economy. covering ideas like unemployment, inflation, GDP, economic development, income inequality, all these big ideas. But in order to properly do them, we have to start with micro foundations. So there is a very standard supply and demand diagram that every introductory econ class covers. We'll be covering that. We get into sort of a handle on it before we then move on to a little bit of price theory. And then we go into the big stuff. And our first rule of economics, we'll always be keeping in the back of the mind. Incentive. What's an incentive?
A reward.
Can you give me an example?
Promotion, raise.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it doesn't have to be, you're picking financial incentives. They don't have to be financial. Why are you taking this course?
For credit, career advancement,
And why do you want that?
money, among other things.
Money among other things, right? Like because you can get a good job, and we can define a good job as one that pays a lot of money, but that doesn't exclusively mean that's a good job. There are good jobs that don't pay a lot of money, but they have other benefits, like a lot of job security, or like the job itself is enjoyable, that kind of stuff. So that's something too we talk about when you want compensating differentials. So we don't want to say incentives are just money. Similarly, you can come and take the course and you can pass the course, but you want to get a good grade. Speaking of which, just because I have my notes up online doesn't mean that you shouldn't like come to class, because participation does matter for your grade. It's like 7%. It's not huge. I don't require very much of it. I require you to say something like once a week on average, whether you're asking a question or answering one of mine. Even if it's wrong, that's okay. I just want you to try, because you generate benefits for everybody when you ask questions. Still come even though the notes are online. But that I do that in part because I want to maintain that incentive. Seems really boring and simple, I know. Incentives matter. Incentives are motives for people to do stuff, right, broadly speaking. But if people can forget that rule very easily. Who won the 2016 election?
President Trump.
Trump. Yep. Now, who was he running against?
Secretary.
Look at you in their honor. I like to ask you, I'm wondering, when will people stop remembering this? As my students say the same age, I was getting farther and farther past. So we'll see. Yeah, Clinton. Now, well, Clinton lost the election, as defined as she lost the electoral college. What did she win? A popular vote, right? Now, in the aftermath of that election, because of course it was a big surprise. I don't know how well you remember it, because it was like more than 8 years ago now. But in the aftermath of that election, tons of people said, well, if we use the popular vote to determine who won the election, if you won the popular vote, you won the presidency, Hillary Clinton would have won. Did you hear people say that? You might have said it yourself. That is wrong. I know it seems strange that I would say that, because we just admitted you won the popular vote. But I'm saying, if the criteria was if you won the popular vote, that doesn't mean she would have won. Why not? Yeah.
Like, are you basically trying to say that popular vote is and people do that?
Yeah. Because you can't be like, oh, now that we know the results, we're going to determine what the criteria is. That's like really weird.
That, like, more like people who are going to vote for Trump being want to vote for because of the popular vote.
Okay, so maybe the
More supporters of certain, whether it be Hillary or Trump,
Mhm.
that have voted because of popular votes matter.
Yeah.
As opposed to this.
yeah, right. So right, we live in Maryland. Do we like matter for the election, for the presidential election? No, not at all. Right? Similarly, so there's probably people in Maryland who are like, I'm not going to bother because like it doesn't make a difference. Similarly, there are people in Alabama who thought the same thing. So you change the system, you change voter behavior. At the same time, there are people in Pennsylvania who voted in part because they knew that theirs was a swing state, and it really mattered which way it went, because it could go either way. It really mattered. They voted because of that. You see this in the data, that swing states had higher voter turnout then as now. But there's another dimension to this as well. So you're already thinking in terms of, well, wait, we just changed the incentives, we're going to change behavior. But there's a bigger one that matters. The incentives of the politicians themselves. Trump built a strategy on those key Rust Belt swing states. His campaign was built on them. He visited those states a lot and did as well. But that was his strategy. If you say, it's a different rule system now, and instead of the Electoral College, assuming we can, wave it away in the Constitution, it's now popular vote, then they're going to have completely different incentives, and therefore they're going to have completely different behavior. And we don't know what would have happened. We don't know. If you change incentives. You change behavior. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Can you go into more detail about incentives? Like what? When you say incentives, does that mean like of visiting the state?
I'm saying like they obviously have an incentive to win. If you change the criteria that's necessary for them to win, you're going to get different behavior. And that behavior might be in one state versus another state. That behavior might be, what does our platform look like? What are we telling voters? How even are we acting like that? There's an argument that Donald Trump in the latest election was very, very disciplined in how he ran his election. You wouldn't have known that from the debates, but generally speaking, there's an argument out there that he was very, very disciplined. Because at the time of the election, he was under federal investigation. Normally, if a president loses an election, they're just sad and they just go do something else. But if Trump had lost that election, not only would he have lost the election, he probably would have gone to jail. So there's this argument out there that the indictments against him made him very motivated to do a good job. Incentives matter. How much it really matters, hard to tell in the circumstance. We don't know the counterfactual, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, yeah. This matters because people are rational. Incentives matter because people are rational. Now, would you consider yourself to be a rational person? Yes, Sam. Do you consider most people to be rational?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, great. Great. Is that common, though? You think most people are? Because usually I don't get that. Why do you think most people are rational?
I mean, we live in the 21st century. People should be logical.
Well, they should be, but are they?
I hope so.
Fair enough. It's tempting to think that people are not rational, right? I get this a lot. Like, well, I'm rational, but other people aren't. Good for you, Sarah, for being humble. In economics, rationality is a low bar. People choose the best action, given their preferences and constraints. That's all it means. That doesn't mean that people never make mistakes. They do. It doesn't mean that people don't necessarily know about an option. They do. Constraint, ignorance is a constraint. If you see someone do something weird, you shouldn't say, well, they're irrational. Your good economists will say, maybe there's something that's going on that I don't understand. If you've ever argued with somebody online about politics, you might think, well, there's no way people are rational. I have an example of someone not being rational. Right? Happens all the time. Have you ever encountered that before? Raise your hand. We get people, if people don't argue on much, right? Well, so, do you want to give me more detail about that conversation you had?
Like someone being irrational.
Yeah.
It's more like a, conversation I had with a friend, and because my other friend's car was driving it, and instead of being feedback, but instead of in that kind of feedback, he spent money for car use.
Oh, that's just being a jerk. I don't know if that's irrational.
No, but he said he's working towards it, he's paying, and he was like doing small maintenance, but
Mm-hmm.
instead of going out right, just pay it full with the money instead of taking it in small maintenance.
Sounds like your friend is giving him a zero interest loan. And maybe she should start charging some interest and changing the incentives. Maybe, right? I generally do this, though, in the context of an online conversation, especially a public one, because people will bring up, and I've done this before, I bring up theory and evidence and logic, and I say this is what's going on, and people will just say that's not true. And it's confusing because it seems like a very clear case. Like for that person, I'm like, I don't know, it's not clearly that's irrational because he's just lying because he's collecting the money. Right? That seems like a rational thing to do, even if it's a jerk thing to do. But in the case of like these larger conversations about, say, the benefits of trade and so forth, it's like, why are you not thinking about this at all in any sort of logical way? It's not like you personally have a financial stake in this. In fact, in some cases, you have a stake to go on my side, right? If I'm saying tariffs are bad because they make things more expensive, and people will be like, well, I don't think that's true. It's like, well, you're making things more expensive for yourself. So, like, what's going on? And the answer is typically, you think that their preferences are figuring out the truth. But really, their preferences are to show that they're in-group. To their in-group, they are part of your in-group. Right? If you've ever posted something online, and it gets likes and loves, and those reacts, and you feel good about yourself, that's where their incentives are. So when you see people doing weird things, don't say, oh, they're stupid or crazy. Think to yourself, maybe their preferences or constraints are not mine. And I am wrong about that. Economics is often very humbling discipline. We don't have that reputation, which is unfortunate, but we really are. Because when we see strange behavior, we don't say people are stupid and crazy. We say maybe there's something we don't know. My favorite example of this is this great paper by Pete Leeson called Ordeals. And so if you Google the word, if you Google Pete Leeson and Ordeals, I should link it in the notes sometimes because I use this so often, you'll find the paper. It's free. It's free. Pull away from current events, let's talk about medieval Europe. In medieval Europe, there were these things called ordeals. Imagine we're a village. We all kind of know each other pretty well. But somebody was murdered. And we don't like, oh, this person was murdered. We need to figure out who did it. And we're like, I don't know, Anthony, you're new in town. Maybe you did it. You probably did it, right? You got that look in the eye. Yeah, I think so. Well, we don't have any evidence. That's a problem. You do care about that. You haven't admitted it. You're not admitting it, are you? No. So, we need to, I know. Well, ask God. Because this medieval Europe, we're all Catholic. We all believe in God and Jesus and all that stuff. And the supreme power of the Catholic Church. So we're going to ask God. Here's how we're going to ask God. Anthony, you're going to come to church. We're all going to watch this, by the way. It's a big gathering church in the middle of town for a reason. And we're going to boil some water. This is a trial by commission. We're going to boil some water. This is one of the ways they did it. And we're going to put a rock at the bottom of this big pot of water. And you are going to put your hand in the boiled water, and you're going to retrieve the rock. And we're going to wrap your hand in bandages, and if it turns out, later when we check it, that your hand's all burned up, that means God has judged you to be guilty. And therefore, you must have killed the guy. But if it turns out that his hand is fine, then we'll say, well, God protected you from the water, from being harmed. You must be innocent. We'll let you go. That was their system. Didn't do it very often, but they did it. It's a good system. No, it doesn't seem like it, right? Does it seem rational? No, right. Why not?
You're testing someone's innocence
Uh-huh.
on their hands.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, they did it though. It doesn't make any sense. Here's what really doesn't make any sense. Most people were found innocent. Most people's hands were found. Most people were absolved of any guilt as a result of these ordeals. They have records of this. This is something we know. They kept those records of this because this was a big deal, right? You're asking God to intervene in the mortal world. So they made note of this. So we have good information that indeed most people were fine. And they were saying, okay, sorry, you never killed the guy. It's good. God said you're okay. Now you probably have some questions. Do you have questions? I'm usually getting a bigger reaction when I do this one. Yeah.
How are they found innocent?
Oh, great question. Because it seems like they should be. So Pete Leeson's Ordeals, his paper begins with saying, this was actually a really good system. We don't think of it as a good system, but we are not properly putting ourselves in the mind of a medieval peasant in Europe. So, first of all, let's take a step back. Let's imagine you're the priest in charge of running this thing. And the people have said, who do you think is Anthony? Anthony, keep in mind, you are, in this scenario, Catholic just like everyone else is. You believe in this stuff just like everyone else does. You believe that this is legit. And I take you to my chambers and I say, Anthony, we're going to do an ordeal. We're going to stick your hand in boiling water. And if you're innocent, God will protect you. And if you're not innocent, your hand's going to get all fucked up. Would you like to admit guilt now and we can avoid this? If you were guilty, would you admit being guilty?
Depends on the severity of punishment. But if I truly believe in God and believe His works, I'll probably.
Yeah, right? Like, it seems like admitting your guilt is strictly a good idea, right? Because if you admit your guilt, you might get a plea deal, some sort of, I'm sorry, explain yourself. But if you get punished by God, not only are you going to get the punishment for murdering the guy, your hand's going to get all messed up, right? It's going to be painful and torturous. And you're going to be embarrassed in front of him. So it seems like a good thing to avoid. If, on the other hand, you're innocent, would you be willing to go through the ordeal? Yeah. So what does the priest do? If you say, let's imagine you're innocent, are you willing to go through the ordeal? And what will you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the priest's like, oh shit, he's willing to go through the ordeal. What does that tell me as the priest? He's probably innocent. So here's what I do. I boil the water. And then, I mentioned, right, we're asking God. You don't ask God for the salt, right? If you're asking God to intervene in the mortal world, you got to make a big show of it. I want to turn off the fire. I don't want to start fire. And then I'm going to say prayers for 3 hours. Because you got to ask God properly. What happens over the course of those 3 hours?
Water's going to be
cool. Sticks his hand in? Oh, it's a miracle. He's fine. That's why I said boil water. Yeah, all right. I said we boil the water, and then it's boiled. I didn't even notice that. People don't necessarily know the fire's been turned off. We all see that's legitimate. Yeah. No, not stupid. Clever. We figured out that you're innocent. This is why most people passed. Because if they're willing to go through the trial, that demonstrates their innocence. Yeah.
What there was water action, how would you put your hand in it?
Well, if you kill somebody and the water's not hot.
So then asking was the water action hot?
I'll say yeah. I think so. And if you don't feel it's hot, that's just a sign that God's protecting you. I don't necessarily know if they noticed them turning off the heat. That information is lost to time. But the point is, this seemed to work really well. And as evidence that it worked really well, Leeson notes that this stopped happening when the Protestant Reformation came about. Because when the Protestant Reformation came about, you could not guarantee that people in the village were Catholic anymore. And the whole thing falls apart if people don't believe it. So they stopped doing it. But given their preferences and constraints, it was actually a pretty darn good system. But they didn't have modern forensics. This is what they got. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. You also note an interesting word. Most people were found innocent, which means, I didn't say all, I said most. And so it does kind of indicate, and Leeson talks about this in his paper, that the priest would sometimes throw somebody under the bus and just whirl their hand anyway. Maybe to maintain the legitimacy, right? If like it always comes out the person is innocent, that's a little weird. But this is also why they only use it as a last resort. You would be lucky to see even just a handful of ordeals in your whole lifetime. But people are smart. The whole point of this is to illustrate this idea that just because you see something weird and stupid, that doesn't mean that people are weird and stupid. It means that you probably don't know what's going on. You probably don't know the full information. And so rather than being arrogant and saying, they're idiots, be humble. Recognize there's probably something going on that you don't understand. Any questions on that? Let's do another one. How am I doing on time? Oh, I got 15. What's the cost benefit? Okay, yeah, I can do this. I like to do this one. I said how to get the most out of life, which is pretty lofty of me. So I'm going to give you an example. This is one of my favorite ones. Let's imagine you're going to a nice restaurant. Not some like I'm going to assume that's how you call a restaurant. Got it. That's press. If it's not, just pretend it is. And let's imagine that 2 items on the menu catch your attention. One is hamburger. Okay, standard hamburger. All the fixing, maybe some fries. The other one is fried monkey, lightly fried, a little bit of a garlic sauce. How many of you will order the hamburger? Right, virtually all of you. I think all of you. Jonathan, you're not raising your hand. Okay. If you want to take the fried monkey balls, you can. Would anyone take the fried monkey balls? Okay. That leads us to an interesting puzzle. Why the hell is this on the menu if no one buys it? What are the costs of putting an item on the menu? Think in the terms of perspective of the company. Think in terms of, just like you might want to imagine yourself in medieval Europe, imagine you're a restaurateur. What are the costs of putting items on the menu? Yeah.
I feel like I saw this one example of how like these sensors, emissions, and put like the vaccine into it. So it's like instead of deciding when you want the Coke, it's more like when you want the Coke or the vaccine, so you can buy something.
So you kind of create this like idea of a choice. So you're saying, maybe they put things on the menu to say, well, now I really want that hamburger because I don't want to have that.
Yeah.
There's a dimension to that, but there's always that risk that somebody orders it. And so you have to fulfill that, right? So what are the costs of every item you put on? What are the costs you put in?
Are you looking for a specific number?
No, I'm just thinking conceptually. Like, what do you have to do? Like, if you have hamburgers on your menu, what do you have to have?
We also have the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to have written on the ingredients.
Yeah. So you have to have the ingredients, right? You have to stock the different parts of the hamburger. You have to have, the fried monkey balls. I mean, you wouldn't fry them first because that would be gross. Right? You have the monkey balls in your freezer, and then you use them when necessary. Okay. So that's big issue one. And of course, too, if no one orders it, you throw out the food, right? Because meat doesn't keep forever. Another important aspect.
Are we still losing money?
No, we're not there yet.
Oh, sorry.
We're not there yet. Another important aspect. Another thing that cut the cost.
Don't you need like labels for someone?
Yeah, you need labor for someone to make it, right? They have to know how to make the hamburger. They have to know how to properly fry those balls. So there are these costs associated with every item on the menu. Now, it could be that it's there to kind of scare people from going to hamburger, though you wonder why people are going to this restaurant in the first place. It's a nice restaurant. Does the hamburger... So every item on the menu has to justify its existence. And you justify its existence by people ordering it. Fair enough? Right? If people are ordering it, we can keep stocking it and keep training people to know how to make this thing. Does the hamburger have to be very good for people to order it? No. All of you wanted a hamburger. But that was your default. It could be just okay. And it would justify its placement there. Does the fried monkey balls have to be good in order to be on there? To overcome that initial disgust that people are going to have? Yeah. They have to be amazing as far as fried monkey balls go. Right? You have had in your life, I expect, hundreds of hamburgers. You probably don't remember any of them. You have those fried monkey balls. They're going to be something you remember for a long time. And they're probably really fantastic. That's the only way they're on that menu, is because they're good. People are rational. They didn't put it on randomly. If it's a nice restaurant, if it's a well-established restaurant, they've done this dance before. And they know, look, I know it sounds weird. We might not call it fried monkey balls, admittedly. They might call it something else. But if that's what it is, they know that this is something that we are good at. You will like this. Trust us. In other words, when you're at a nice restaurant, be brave. Order the strangest thing on the menu. Because the thing that's hardest, the thing that sounds the most disgusting, had to work hardest to get there. People are rational. A little asterisk, if you're really sensitive to certain things, if you have allergies, obviously you're careful of that, right? I grew up in Iowa. I'm very sensitive to spicy food, so I'm cautious about that. I'm unusual in that way. But generally speaking, if you don't have any special considerations, order the strangest thing. The most anyway. It's scarce, right? They had to make decisions. All this is sort of an application of what we call us being a little crazy. That's all right. Cost-benefit analysis. It is exactly what you think it is. If the total benefits of doing something exceed the total costs, you do it. If, yes, people usually don't order the fried monkey balls, but enough people do, then we go for it. We got that. Now that's admittedly a little boring. I think people generally get that idea of cost-benefit analysis. Is everyone confused by that? If you are confused, don't feel embarrassed, because I'm sort of so deep in this, I forget what's obvious and what's not. I think we're pretty good on that. What's cool about cost-benefit analysis, it appears in lots of unusual ways. Here's my favorite way it appears. I have in my hands a keyboard. And like any keyboard, it has this particular organization. It's weird. I'm trying to center, but this thing is anchored to the thing, so just pretend like this. What's weird? Anyone know what's weird about a keyboard? The layout of this keyboard. The QWERTY layout, yeah. Why is it called the QWERTY layout?
It's up
QWERTY. QWERTY. What's weird about it?
It's just alphabetically lined up. You would expect it.
Maybe like that ABCD.
I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be ABCD, right? What are the most common letters that you use?
Vowels.
Vowels, yeah. Right? Now, when your hands rest on a keyboard, they naturally go to that middle row. And that's the easiest place for you to hit those buttons. So you would expect the vowels to be in the middle. That's easiest. You expect like the weird letters, like J and semicolon, right, which are in the middle, to be off to the side because you don't use them very often. That will be the optimal layout. That is not what we have. Why the fuck do we have this? There are ways to get an optimal layout. You can look them up, right? And when there's different layouts you can do for a keyboard. It's awkward. You can reprogram. You can download something to reprogram your computer so that when you hit the like the M button, it doesn't respond with M. It responds with something else. A little awkward, but maybe you get used to it. You can get a faster typing speed. Different layout. It's not hugely faster, but it is faster. So the question becomes, why do we have a layout that is set up to be suboptimal? That could be faster, but yes, you're only slightly faster, but who cares what the keys are? Yeah.
This might be apocryphal, but I think the reason is originally for typewriters, you can type the word typewriter entirely with the top row. And it was a sales thing.
Oh, it's a sales thing?
I think, but that might be apocryphal.
Yeah, that might be apocryphal. There is one country that you can also type completely in the top row. Another country with only the top row keys. Fun bit of trivia. I'll tell you after we go through this. So that might be a sales thing. It seems like it might be true. I don't know. But the story originally comes because before it has a lot to do with typewriters. What are typewriters? Tell me a little bit about how they work. Pretend I'm dumb. Yeah.
Instead of things appearing, it's hammers with
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, mechanical hammers. Not digital, right? And so they discovered that when they invented these things, and people are typing, you can type pretty fast if you train. That when you type so fast, all this chunking back and forth, these physical motions, not digital, but physical motions over and over again, the keyboard gets jammed. They spend time to unjam it. And so what they did is they set up the keyboard so that it purposely slows you down. It is not set up to be optimal because optimal ends up not being fast. Does not be optimal. Fast is not optimal. Right. Which is good for typewriters. That's why they set it up. Maybe they happen to put the typewriter keys at the very top for sales purposes. Not how they made it up. Maybe that's true or not. I'm not sure. But this is the argument for why it's set up this way. Well, they're great. Do your computers jam? So why are they still set up this way? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's think in terms of the costs and benefits. What would be the cost? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, but again, if we're switching over from typewriters to computers, then that's going to be part of the story. But imagine we have just started introducing computers to the office. People are transitioning. Yeah, exactly, right? And so there are these switching costs. And if we are going to switch over to a new system, then we have to retrain everybody. to use this new optimized layout. And then as these things become more common, the computers are now everywhere, we have keyboards everywhere. Now we've increased the cost even more. Now we also have to swap out the keyboards. And now as you bring up too, we have the factory changes too. These are big costs. These costs, this new training not only imply in the typists who are training, it also implies into any typist schools, right? Any school that teaches people how to type might have to change their curriculum to adapt to a new layout. That's a cost as well. There are all these switching costs. What are the switching benefits? Slightly tighter, faster typing speed. Which do you think is bigger? The costs. This is what we call path dependent. This is why you have a QWERTY keyboard. It's a relic from way back when they wanted to slow you down. And now we're stuck with it. And the costs are just not, it's also just too high. The benefits are not worth switching out of it. Path dependence is when some sort of previous standard, past decisions, that's what I say. Make it impractical. To adopt optimal standards. And you are stuck with something suboptimal. Note that path dependence has two components. It used to actually be optimal. This QWERTY keyboard used to be optimal. It made sense. You have to make sense why it has to make sense why people adopted it in the first place. But something changed. It no longer makes sense, but it's now more switching. So every path-dependent story has these two components to it. This used to be smart. Now things have changed. It's no longer smart, but we're stuck with it. I think there's an essay. You're going to write an essay over the course of the semester called the Economic Naturalist Essay, where you identify some puzzle in the world and then use economics to explain the story. Path dependence is a good workhorse for this essay. Somebody wrote an essay about why Japan has two different electrical standards. So Japan, the country Japan has it has two different electric grids that cannot talk to each other. So if there is a surplus of energy in one part of Japan, it cannot send that energy to another part of Japan because it's like the grids just don't interact. And it's like, why the hell did you do that? That seems really dumb. And the answer is because when Japan was first electrified, they were in a rush to electrify because the benefits of electrification are so big, are so huge. So in order to get all the different parts and transformers they needed to buy from both Europe and the United States, which meant they brought standards from two different parts of the world. And now they can't talk to each other, and this is a system they're stuck with. And they could pick one, but that would require replacing the entire grid on half the country. It's incredibly expensive. And so this. Any questions? Well, we are just about out of time. So with that in mind, I remind you, you're going to read a Bastiat reading. We're going to dive into, I erased it, but there was big lesson number 1, incentives matter, which I think we covered pretty well. Lesson number 2, opportunity cost, which we'll be talking about next time. I will see you on Thursday. Have a great couple of days.